After months of failed negotiations, a joint US-led coalition launched an operation that would serve as an example of strategic brilliance for decades to come. The Gulf War of 1990 to 1991 led to the liberation of Kuwait from the dictatorship of Saddam Hussein and the nearly total elimination of the Iraqi army. In less than 2 months of active combat, Iraq lost its fleet, aircraft, and close to 50,000 of its personnel. In comparison, the coalition forces lost less than 300 of its servicemen. In this video, we will analyze the decision of Bush's administration to embark on a path of war and the deadly execution of Operation Desert Storm. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notifications to not miss our weekly videos. First, it is essential to understand the development of the Iraqi regime prior to 1990. After failing to achieve its goals in the 8-year war against Iran, Saddam Hussein was in a critical position. Being a dictator, he relied on fear and the projection of strength to hold the country together. Not being able to fulfill his promise of victory against Iran by many was seen as a sign of weakness. Additionally, unprecedented spending on modern weapon systems put Iraq in a deep hole of massive national debt. This created perfect conditions for a possible military coup. Thus, Saddam had to find a solution that would both reinforce his position within Iraq's society and be realistically achievable. A short and decisive military campaign against a weak enemy would serve as a perfect unifying symbol. It would fuel the Iraq propaganda machine, making war against Iran a long-forgotten issue. In Kuwait, Saddam saw a solution to his problems. Kuwait, a small country to the south of Iraq, has for years enjoyed its rich oil reserves, becoming a significant player in the global market. It actively cooperated with Western democracies, attracting investments and growing its economy at an impressive pace. Given its size, Kuwait hardly had any human capital to maintain a reasonable military force. Instead, it allocated its available resources towards economic advancement, fully exploiting all of the benefits of Western capitalism. This made Kuwait a perfect target in Saddam's mind, both politically and militarily. From the political side, it would be an easy target for Iraq's propaganda machine to frame Kuwait as an Arab country poisoned by Western ideals and way of life, thus making it Iraq's mission to liberate fellow brothers and bring them on a true path. As for the military perspective, after the war with Iran, Iraq maintained one of the largest armies in the world, with hundreds of thousands of soldiers who had years of combat experience. This made the trivial army of Kuwait a force not even worth consideration. In addition, if the oil from Kuwait was to be obtained by Iraq, it would put Saddam in a position to dictate oil prices to the rest of the world, thus drastically enriching himself. For Saddam, the combination of these factors more than justified the decision to launch an oppressive campaign. On the 2nd of August 1990, 3 Iraqi Republican Guard Forces command divisions attacked across the Kuwaiti frontier. A mechanized infantry division and an armored division conducted the main attack south into Kuwait along the Safwan-Abdali axis, driving for the Al Jarrah Pass. Another armored division conducted a supporting attack farther west. The 3 attacking armored and mechanized formations, supported by combat aircraft, linked up at Al Jarrah. The 2 divisions conducting the main attack continued east to Kuwait City. By evening, Iraqi forces had secured the city. Concurrently, the supporting armored division moved south from Al Jarrah to establish blocking positions on the main avenues of approach from the Saudi border. Kuwaiti armed forces were no match for the assembled Iraqi force. On the 4th of August, Iraqi tanks were establishing defensive positions along the Saudi Arabia border, finalizing the occupation of Kuwait. Hundreds of logistics vehicles were moving men and massive quantities of munitions and supplies south. By this time, more Iraqi divisions were moving south to Kuwait from garrisons in Iraq. The world was shaken. UN and world powers immediately realized the global economic threat posed by the oil control Saddam had gained. At first, President Bush was not ready for military action. He suggested asking Congress to impose economic sanctions against Iraq and to support a United Nations resolution condemning the invasion. The Arab world as well did not remain silent. Most Arab leaders joined Western countries in opposing Saddam. Saudi Arabia especially felt a genuine threat of them being the next target of Iraq's military machine. Without even realizing it, Saddam politically united 2 worlds, turning the Arab coalition against himself. Immediately after the invasion of Kuwait, Iraq began campaigning for public support. This effort included portraying Iraq as the champion of anti-colonialism, social justice, Arab unity, the Palestinian cause, and Islam. On the 8th of August, Iraqi media began broadcasting threats that regimes cooperating with the United States would be destabilized. The focus of these threats was Saudi Arabia and Egypt, which Saddam blamed for organizing Arab opposition to Iraq. Iraq indicated it no longer recognized the legitimacy of the ruling family of Saudi Arabia. Two anti-Saudi radio stations named Voice of Holy Mecca and Holy Medina began broadcasting programs condemning the Saudi royal family. After Kuwait was firmly under Iraqi military control, physical abuse and brutality were common. There are numerous reports of rapes of Kuwaiti and foreign women, often in the presence of family members. Anyone detained by Iraqi authorities was subject to torture, often resulting in death. Iraqi intelligence and security officials converted Kuwaiti schools and other public buildings into detention and interrogation centers. The Kuwaiti government estimates more than 1,000 civilians were murdered during the Iraqi occupation. U.S. Defense Secretary Dick Cheney reiterated that oil was at the heart of Saddam's actions. He has clearly done what he has to do to dominate OPEC, the Gulf, and the Arab world. He is 40 kilometers from Saudi Arabia, and its oil production is only a couple of hundred kilometers away. If he doesn't take it physically, with his new wealth, he will still have an impact, and will be able to acquire new weapons, including nuclear weapons. The problem will get worse, not better. Looking at the military possibilities and options, we should not underestimate the U.S. military forces we would need to be prepared for a major conflict. Americans realized that if a military operation against Iraq was to be organized, it would be almost impossible without full cooperation from Saudi Arabia, whose land would need to serve as a major launching pad. After a round of negotiations, Bush publicly announced that the decision to defend Saudi Arabia was made, thus beginning the transfer of United States personnel to its territory. Initially, the goal was only to establish a defense force, a plan known as Operation Desert Shield. Coupled with deadly economic sanctions, it was meant to impose fear on Saddam and cripple Iraq's economy, forcing their withdrawal from Kuwait. Nevertheless, sanctions did not have such an immediate effect, leading Bush to rethink the chosen strategy. The president made his four objectives in the Gulf clear: Iraq's withdrawal from Kuwait, the restoration of Kuwait's government, the security of the Gulf, and the safety of Americans. In his September speech, he added the last, fifth objective: we stand today at a unique and extraordinary moment. The crisis in the Persian Gulf, as grave as it is, also offers a rare opportunity to move toward a historic period of cooperation. Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order, can emerge. A new era freer from the threat of terror, stronger in the pursuit of justice, and more secure in the quest for peace. An era in which the nations of the world, East and West, North and South, can prosper and live in harmony. Today, that new world is struggling to be born, a world quite different from the one we've known. With Iraq forces remaining in Kuwait despite economic sanctions, they began building a complex network of defensive positions and minefields, and pouring additional military personnel into the country. The times of terror and darkness unfolded in front of innocent Kuwait civilians, who were, in many cases, tortured and murdered if there was even the slightest suspicion of collaboration with Western allies. All of the forces in Kuwait were under the command of the appointed governor of Kuwait, Ali Hassan I. Majid, Saddam's paternal cousin. He was known for his ruthless purges of the military during the Iran-Iraq War and associated with the alleged use of chemical weapons to pacify the Kurds in previous uprisings. At least 43 divisions were arrayed in depth with strong operational and tactical reserves. Dug-in infantry was reinforced by revetted tanks and artillery, all backed by armored reserves of brigade strength or larger. Along the beaches, in testimony to Iraqi concern about an amphibious assault, no fewer than 4 infantry divisions and a mechanized division dug in behind minefields and obstacles. In central Kuwait, roughly in the area, between As Salim Air Base and the Kuwait International Airport, 1 armored and 2 mechanized divisions formed strong corps-level reserves, with additional forces to the northwest. Along the main north-south road from Kuwait City to Iraq stood an operational reserve of several regular army armored and mechanized divisions. To counter this, a united task force was assembled as a result of the cooperation of 42 countries. Led by the United States, the Joint Army was a formidable power with the most advanced military equipment, including submarines, warships, aircraft, and 950,000 military personnel. Within the command structure, the task force was split in two. The first one, commanded by General Schwarzkopf, included US, British, and French forces. Lieutenant General Khalid bin Sultan commanded the second part of the force, which consisted of the Saudi Arabian Armed Forces, the Arab Islamic Corps, consisting of 2 Egyptian and 1 Syrian division. The plan further separated the command between 5 different sectors. On the right flank, JFCN, Marcent, and JFCE, consisting of Egyptian, Kuwaiti, Saudi, and Syrian forces, would hold the enemy's tactical and operational forces in place by breaching Iraqi defenses in Kuwait and encircling Iraqi forces in the heel of Kuwait and Kuwait City. JFCN would block the Iraqi force north of Kuwait City. Marcent would destroy enemy forces and seize key objectives southeast of Al-Jara City. Navy and Marine forces in the Gulf would create a deception through amphibious exercises and feints before and during the ground offensive. JFCE would protect Marcent's right flank by destroying Iraqi forces and securing key objectives along the coast. General Schwarzkopf determined that the main effort would be conducted by the heavy maneuver forces of the 2 U.S. Corps, with the main attack on the Republican Guard conducted by the U.S. 7 Corps. The 7 Corps would consist of 4 heavy divisions, an armored cavalry regiment, and reinforced corps troops. The 18th Airborne Corps would secure the western flank of the main attack, cut Iraqi lines of support, block any Iraqi withdrawal through the Euphrates Valley, and participate in the final attack on remnants of the Republican Guard in the pursuit and exploitation portion of the main attack. On January 17th, after the total failure of a diplomatic effort to make Saddam withdraw from Kuwait, it was decided to eject him with military force. The needed army was assembled, and the plan, Operation Desert Storm, was ready for implementation. In announcing the start of the war, President Bush stated, "Why act now? Why not wait? The world could wait no longer." While the world waited, Saddam Hussein systematically raped, pillaged, and plundered a tiny nation, no threat to his own. He subjected the people of Kuwait to unspeakable atrocities. While the world waited, while Saddam stalled, more damage was being done to the fragile economies of the Third World, emerging democracies of Eastern Europe, and the entire world, including to our own economy. While the world waited, Saddam Hussein met every overture of peace with open contempt. While the world prayed for peace, Saddam prepared for war. Nevertheless, before engaging in a ground offensive, the military command wanted to degrade Iraq's defensive capabilities by conducting continuous strategic bombardments. At the beginning of Operation Desert Storm, there were 2,430 fixed-wing aircraft in theater, just more than 1/4 of which belonged to non-US coalition partners. For over a month, ground forces remained stationary while fighter jets and bombers severely crippled Iraq's defenses, fully eliminating Iraq's fleet, air power, and a huge portion of heavy land equipment. By the 24th of February, after less than 40 days since the beginning of the campaign, Iraq had lost 1,772 of its tanks, 948 of its APCs, and 1,474 of its artillery systems. Obviously, the remaining Iraqi soldiers were devastated, showing no motivation to hold their positions, waiting for a certain death. This significantly eased the task for future ground operation. Iraqi frontline divisions had been reduced in effectiveness by approximately 50% due to desertion, supply degradation, and casualties the air campaign inflicted. Operation Desert Storm's final phase began early on the 24th of February, after 38 days of aerial bombardment. Operational Command unleashed combined arms attacks against Iraqi forces at 3 points. 18th Corps conducted a massive air and ground envelopment to secure the coalition's western flank and establish forward support bases deep in Iraq. In the center of the coalition line, 7 Corps progressed along the Wadi al-Batin. In the east, Marcent and JFCE attacked north into Kuwait. By the end of the following day, on the 25th of February, each of the operational directions showed significant progress, only with JFCN remaining stationary. On February 26th, the Joint Task Force secured Kuwait City and the majority of the country, capturing over 100,000 prisoners and eliminating Iraq's military capabilities. Estimates were that only 5 to 7 of Iraq's 43 combat divisions remained capable of offensive operations. The combined coalition forces, ground, air, naval, special, and supporting forces, had won one of the fastest and most complete victories in military history. The ground campaign was clearly a success, and the final, crucial element in a decisive coalition victory. The coalition forged an effective fighting force, destroyed much of the Iraqi army, and liberated Kuwait while sustaining light casualties. This overall victory was achieved through detailed planning and bold, aggressive execution. Coalition air forces rapidly achieved air superiority in Kuwait and set the stage for the coalition ground forces' dramatic envelopment, destruction of the combat effectiveness of the Republican Guards, and defeat of Saddam Hussein's forces in detail. By the end of the war, Iraq lost nearly 50,000 soldiers, 3,300 tanks, 2,100 APCs, and 2,200 artillery systems. In comparison, the coalition lost only 292 soldiers, 31 tanks, 31 APCs, and 1 artillery system. After the total success of Operation Desert Storm, President Bush decided to suspend offensive operations as the first step to a negotiated ceasefire and resolution of the crisis in the Persian Gulf region. The enemy was defeated, objectives were achieved, and there was no need to risk the lives of coalition force soldiers anymore. Saddam Hussein's plan to dominate the oil-rich Persian Gulf, an ambition on which he squandered his country's resources, was frustrated. This war set an extraordinary example of international cooperation at the beginning of the post-Cold War era. After peace negotiations, the coalition force fully withdrew from Iraq's territory. Additionally, it was agreed that Iraq officially recognizes Kuwait's sovereignty and that it divest itself of all weapons of mass destruction. In the aftermath of Iraq's defeat, Kurds in the north of the country and Shi'is in the south rose in a rebellion that was suppressed by Saddam with great brutality. Surprisingly, despite such a humiliating defeat, Saddam managed to maintain his power and silence all of the rising opposition. Being a dictator is one thing Saddam knew how to do best. It would take another 12 years to bring down his regime, and 15 years to finally send him to the afterlife.